Welcome back to Narrow Path Doctrine. My name is Jim. I've been reading and studying the book of Romans. It is one of the most important books in the New Testament when it comes to theology and doctrine. And there are a couple of verses in the first chapter that I really wanted to focus in on in this next little while. We'll focus in on one here today, and it is Romans 1:16. Let's read through it here. First of all, it says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to every one that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek." Now, what I'll do is we'll just kind of go through each piece of this verse and really get into more depth as to what this one particular verse means. You know, it's amazing when you really do try to bring out everything in a verse. I mean, I saw John MacArthur spend months on one verse preaching on it. We won't do that here. We'll do this in one episode here, but I did want to go through the verse, and we'll talk about the Greek in that verse too, the important words that are in there. I will try to pronounce the words, and my apologies off the top if I do butcher them. I am still learning Greek, but just because I can't pronounce it doesn't mean that I can't look up what the word means. And we'll put the word here on the screen as well, and you can maybe look it up if you want to. So we'll go through this piece by piece, and we'll have some theological notes here at the end pertaining to this verse as well. The negative construction here is deliberate and revealing. Paul doesn't say, "I am proud of the gospel" or "I glory in the gospel," though he does glory in it elsewhere. He says he is not ashamed of it. The construction implies that shame would be the natural, understandable, humanly predictable response to preaching the gospel in Rome. He's writing to the Romans, of course. To stand in the intellectual and political capital of the world and declare that salvation comes through a crucified Jewish peasant raised from the dead by divine power was to invite the full contempt of Roman sophistication. The philosopher would sneer, the politician would dismiss, the cultured Roman would find it beneath serious engagement. Paul acknowledges the social and intellectual pressure without yielding to it. He is not ashamed. The gospel is identified as of Christ, belonging to Christ, centered in Christ, inseparable from the person of the Son of God, who was the subject of verses 3 and 4 of Romans 1 here. To be ashamed of the gospel is to be ashamed of Christ, and Paul will not be. The one who warned that he who is ashamed of Christ before men will find Christ ashamed of him before the Father has in Paul a servant who takes that warning with absolute seriousness. Here is the ground of Paul's fearlessness. He's not ashamed of the gospel because he knows what it is. It's not a religious opinion. It's not a moral philosophy competing with other philosophies for intellectual acceptance. It's not a cultural tradition to be respected or dismissed depending on one's background. It is the power of God. And I'll put this Greek phrase on the screen because I won't give it a shot. It's the operative, effective, irresistible power of the Almighty. The same power that called the world into existence from nothing, the same power that raised Christ from the dead, is the power that operates in and through the gospel proclamation. The gospel doesn't merely offer salvation, it affects it in those to whom God applies it. This is the answer to every objection that the gospel is too simple, too foolish, too offensive, or too weak to accomplish anything in sophisticated minds and hardened hearts. The issue is never the adequacy of the gospel or the receptivity of the audience. The issue is the power of God, and the power of God is not subject to human assessment of its probability of success. The power of God in the gospel is directed toward a specific end, salvation. The word here is soteria, I believe it's pronounced. In Paul's usage, it's comprehensive. It encompasses justification, adoption, sanctification, and glorification. It's the full deliverance of the sinner from the guilt, the power, and ultimately the presence of sin, and his restoration to full fellowship with God. The gospel is the power of God unto this end, not merely toward it as a possibility, but effectively accomplishing it in those to whom God applies it. The scope of gospel salvation is defined by faith, not by ethnicity, not by social standing, not by prior religious heritage, not by intellectual capacity. To everyone without ethnic or social restriction who believes. The present participle here, and I'll put this one on the screen, I won't give that one a shot. The one who is believing, that's what that word means, captures the ongoing reality of faith rather than a single past act. Saving faith is not a momentary event that produces no lasting reality. It's a continuing posture of the soul toward Christ. The question that immediately arises, and that Paul will answer at length beginning in chapter 3 in the book of Romans, is whether this faith is itself the sinner's contribution to his salvation. The answer, consistent with the entire argument of Romans, is no. The faith that saves is itself the gift of God, the fruit of effectual calling, the evidence of regeneration already accomplished by the Spirit. Every one that believeth defines the recipients of salvation without making faith the independent cause of it. The first here is not merely chronological, though it is that. The gospel went to Jerusalem first, then to Judea and Samaria, then to the ends of the earth. It's also covenantal. The Jews had the oracles of God, the covenants, the promises, the patriarchs. The gospel came to them first because the promises through which it came were given to them first. But the also to the Greek is equally emphatic. The Gentile is equally the object of gospel power. There is no second-class status in salvation. Jew and Greek stand on the same ground, the ground of faith, the ground of grace, the ground of the power of God unto salvation. This pairing also maintains the Israel church distinction. Paul doesn't collapse Jews into Greeks or Greeks into Jews. He preserves the distinction while declaring equal gospel access. And this is significant for a dispensational reading of the book of Romans. The distinction between Israel and the Gentiles is not erased by the gospel, but is maintained even while both are equally brought under its saving power. The single most important word in this verse may be power. The gospel doesn't merely present a compelling case that the hearer may accept or reject on the basis of his own autonomous judgment. It's the power of God, operative, effective, accomplishing the divine purpose in those to whom God applies it. This is the death blow to every scheme of salvation that roots the decisive factor in human choice. If the gospel were only persuasion, then its success would depend on the quality of the argument and the receptivity of the audience, and Paul would have reason to be ashamed of it before the sophisticated Romans. But because it's the power of God, its success depends on God. And God's power is not defeated by human hostility, human sophistication, or human hardness of heart. The elect will be called. The gospel will accomplish what God sends it to accomplish. Paul's refusal to be ashamed of the gospel is rooted in his knowledge of what the gospel is. He's not courageous by temperament alone, although he is certainly bold. He's courageous because he understands that the gospel he carries is the power of God, and shame in the face of God's power is simply irrational. The preacher or teacher who is tempted toward shame before sophisticated or hostile audiences has in that moment temporarily forgotten what he carries. The antidote to gospel shame is not primarily moral exhortation to be braver. It's theological clarity about what the gospel is. The power of God, effective, irresistible in those appointed to believe, sovereign over every human objection and every social pressure. To every one that believeth defines the recipients without defining the ultimate cause. Reformed theology has always carefully distinguished the instrument of salvation from its cause. The cause of salvation is the sovereign grace of God, His eternal election, His effectual calling, His irresistible application of redemption through the Spirit. The instrument through which that salvation is received is faith. Faith doesn't produce salvation by its own power. It receives salvation as the empty hand extended toward the fullness of Christ. The power is God's. The salvation is God's. The faith itself is God's gift. The believing one is the one in whom God has already worked the miracle of regeneration that makes genuine faith possible. And finally, to the Jew first is not an embarrassment to be explained away or a relic of pre-gospel era. It's a theological reality that Paul takes seriously enough to state it twice in Romans, here and in Romans 2:10. The Jewish people retain a covenantal priority in the purpose of God. Not a priority of merit, not a priority of guaranteed salvation, but a priority of historical privilege and eschatological promise. Romans 9 through 11 will develop this at enormous length, culminating in the declaration that all Israel shall be saved, a future national turning of the Jewish people to their Messiah that dispensational eschatology rightly reads as a literal future historical event. The Jew first of verse 16 is not merely historical past tense. It's the seed of an argument Paul won't finish until chapter 11. All right, thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope you enjoyed this type of teaching. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with others. And if you have not subscribed to the channel as of yet, please do so and click the notification bell to get updates when new videos come out here on the channel. So until next time, remember, true doctrine matters. God bless.
And though sometimes I stumble and stray, I know your hold is there until that day. Let me